Hello everybody, this is Manu S and welcome to another Artifact news update. We just recently had probably the most interesting bits of new information since the big info dump around like 9th of March that I covered all of in my first video, which you can find up here. Oh, up there actually. And where I go over all the information that has been revealed there, which was basically the first big reveal of the game itself, aside from people knowing that it's going to happen. But there was this article by Rock Paper Shotgun that was released a week ago. Unfortunately, I was traveling, so I wasn't able to make this video until just recently, where we got a bunch of really nice and interesting new info regarding the future of Artifact and how it's going to be played and going to work out. Alright, I decided I'll just put the video up, the article up on screen, as you can see here, and just go over it with you guys and tell you what I think and what, in my opinion, the stuff they shared with us means for the game based on my experience and, yeah, sort of assumption over what I think makes sense and they are most likely to bet at or do with this. Okay, so let's take a look. Basically, the article covers how the game positions itself within the card game market and relative to other card games, and how it's like kind of fits in perfectly in the market, filling kind of like a hole in the market, given that you can't really consider Magic a digital card game and that the digital card game world has nothing remotely comparable to Magic. It only has these CCGs basically these days. And Artifact, as we already know by now, is going to be a TCG, so it's going to be probably the first digital TCG that is designed for digital and not just like Magic Online, for example, where you have a carbon copy of paper Magic in the digital world that you can spend money on just like in the real world. Okay, first of all, they talk a bit about the potential economy and the upsides of the not free-to-play model. Like the model that I think they will go for at this point is basically very close to what we know from Magic, I would assume, partially because Richard Garfield is involved with the game. The Magic model is, while not perfect, in its core a very robust and proven model. If you want to go for TCGs, like basically all paper TCGs copied Magic's model, more or less. So I don't see why they would like drastically depart from that, other than trying to fix some of its issues. Like one of the things that they announced already is that they're gonna try to keep it from being as pay to win as Magic is, in the sense that power level and importance in deck building often is very much tied to rarity in Magic. The best, most powerful cards are usually rares, and especially mythic rares, making them pretty rare and therefore automatically pretty expensive on the secondary market, especially if they are in a top deck or even in the best deck. So they said they will put plenty of like powerful key cards in common rarity and stuff like that, so that the like the key cards for the top decks will not automatically be the highest rarity and make the top decks spike in price drastically, like in secondary market price drastically, by being popular and everyone wanting to play them, and then suddenly you have to pay like 30-40 bucks per card per like most rare card for your deck and stuff like that on the secondary market, or hope to open them in packs and have no other way to get them. That would be pretty bad. So that's like the biggest issue basically of the Magic model, in my opinion. But the upside of that is that it's basically only a loan, an investment that you make. It's not like you spend money and it's gone. The card retains value, and you might even be able to sell it for higher value later, or at least not lose all the money and get some of the money back. If the price drops like before rotation, the card will obviously be worth less, but you still get some money for it. It's not like you just have a useless card that you spend money on and have no way of getting any of it back. So they're talking a bit about the free-to-play model and stuff, and the artifact programmer Barnett said, "We've experimented a lot with different types of free-to-play games, and it really depends on what we are trying to do with that game. With Dota, it made sense because the original was free and players expected it. In this case, we find that having an upfront cost is going to be better for the game long term," which I can see. Like, if you keep in mind, they already said that part of the pack prices, like what you pay for a pack, will go to prize pools for major tournaments. So that's one of the big upsides of this kind of like non-free-to-play model. You have a nice way of supporting major tournaments and prize pools, because if your game is popular and a lot of people buying your product, you have a lot of extra money in your prize pools, because normally this stuff is probably calculated as sort of like marketing cost, promotional cost, so you have a fixed amount that you can offer as like pricing for tournaments. But with this way you have a dynamic prize pool for major tournaments that can grow really big if your game is doing really well, for example, and then you can create extra incentive for a competitive scene. A competitive scene, in my opinion, is the A and O for strategy card games like this. So having further ways to support and expand competitive play and raise the stakes in the game is really great. And in my experience, that drives these games. I think Magic is as big and successful as it is these days, in big part due to its very active and well-going competitive scene and major tournaments, making people of all levels and ages aspire to the pros and to the top level and wanting to make it to the Pro Tour and do well at the Pro Tour and win money with the game they enjoy and love. So yeah, I think that's a good thing in the end, and it also gives you the mentioned flexibility that I think I talked about already in the last video, but is brought up here again. Programmer Bruno Carlucci added, having an upfront cost gives you a set of things to start with, which then gives you the tools to go and find the things you want regarding the market integration. Here they talk a bit about the built-in storefront. This leaves leaves it open to some speculation, but I think the built-in storefront most likely just refers to the Steam market. But there is a possibility that there will be an integrated marketplace that works over Steam but is directly integrated into Artifact and is exclusive to Artifact and working a bit different than the direct like Steam market usage that we know, for example, from Counter-Strike Global Offensive, for anyone that knows that. And yeah, they also state here, people will be able to build decks for a couple bucks very easily. To be fair, they always can in games. The question is what the price of the top decks, the competitive decks are. You can always build like cheap decks in any game, even in like CCGs, by just buying a bunch of packs, crafting cheap cards, building a cheap deck. So it is definitely comes down to whether or not they get the rarity of the cards right to keep the secondary market prices in check. Basically kind of controlling and regulating the secondary market, because otherwise decks can get really expensive. Even though you can resell them later, you still need like even potentially a couple $100 in Magic available as like budget to buy a deck, play it for a season, and then sell it later to get most of it back if you sell it early enough before the rotation. And yeah, the other major upside of this model is that it's a lot easier to switch decks. You can sell one deck, buy another without losing much if you do it within a proper time frame where there's no major price shifts, while in CCGs, every time you don't want to play a deck anymore and play something else, if you disenchant it, you lose like, what, 75% or something most of the time of what you invested, ending up with like 25% of that deck, which is often not even enough to build the other deck you want. And every time you do that, your collection shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, and sets you back so far on the grind that it's not really possible, so you're stuck with what you got. One thing that I read out of this part is that they kind of had the assumption, like, I think there's a line here, exactly, where was it? Exactly here. If Artifact can strike a balance where I can quickly, comfortably build a variety of decks using only the cards I get for buying in and whatever I earn just by playing, I'll gladly pay up front. And I'm pretty sure this is a potential misinterpretation or misunderstanding on their part, because I feel like Valve made it very clear that getting free stuff devalues everything attached to it, which is why they don't like free-to-play stuff. And if you have a secondary market, you cannot give away stuff for free, because that screws over your secondary market and screws over the people investing into the secondary market. So I'm pretty sure it's not like you buy the game and then it's sort of a bit like a free-to-play game where you still kind of grind some stuff and get some stuff. I don't think it's going to work like that. I'm pretty sure it's basically just like Magic. You buy in, which means you get like kind of starter decks, maybe a couple packs or something, like a base of cards to work with for the initial, buying the initial game, kind of like a starter deck, like buying a starter deck in a paper card game. And from there on, you basically just go ahead and buy packs, just like in paper, or play tournaments with your starter stuff and try to win stuff that way. I'm pretty sure all you can get from the game is stuff by winning, and not like winning as in grinding, but by like, I don't know, performing in tournaments, which might even cost entry fees and have prizes, and then you get new stuff. But I would be very surprised if there's ways to get cards for free at all, because that would kind of undermine the whole system, and I think that's not gonna be how it works. It's gonna feel a bit bigger of an entry gap, like entry barrier, rather, sorry. An entry barrier, just like we know from Magic, although cheaper, because they are aware of the downsides of the pay-to-play system in that regard, so they already said they want to try and address the whole entry barrier, pay-to-win kind of thing. And if they do that well, they're gonna end up with a better version of the age-old trading card game model, which is great. And then, yeah, you have to spend money to expand your collection, either by paying for tournaments and winning more than you invested, making a good return, or just by speculating on the market, trading and buying and selling stuff. But yeah, no free stuff, because that would just undermine everything and devalue everything. So pretty sure that's not gonna happen. And either they meant whatever I earn just by playing in the sense of winnings from tournaments and stuff, or they simply might just have a wrong idea of how it works, because there's no way I can imagine them giving you free cards in a game with a secondary market economy where free stuff values everything. Okay, the next thing they talk about is really interesting. Big statement here from Barnett. We don't want to do a ladder. That's big, because all the card games we know by now, even MTG Arena, like the basically latest digital version of Magic, has a ladder. The usual best of one grind to the top. And Artifact said they not want to do it. Instead they said we're experimenting with different systems that are more tournament oriented rather than ladder oriented. The idea is that if you want a competitive experience, you get a more self-enclosed experience. A good inspiration we have is that Dota has these battle cups. Every Saturday you get to play in a single elimination tournament, and if you win, you're done. We feel that those experiences are better for people who actually want to try something out. It allows them to explore something. They know how many matches they have to play and win, which is much better than just playing this infinite grind that doesn't really get you anywhere. And I honestly couldn't agree more. I think this is great. I think ladder is this kind of semi-pointless, exhausting chore that only gets meaning usually through awarding like qualification points to qualify for like major tournaments, like they eventually did in Hearthstone with the with the championship preliminaries. But other than that, ladder is just a massive kind of pointless grind, and something that basically all the digital card games right now that I know lack is proper tournament support. Like all the tournaments are mostly just done outside of the game by third parties, or some of them are done as like major tournaments by the game's creators, like in Hearthstone's case, for example, the major tournament scene is obviously done by Blizzard, but it's still outside the game. There's like no tournament support inside the game, inside the client. There's no sit and goes, pick up games, stuff like that. And I always wondered why, because I think that's a great way to play card games and a much more sort of holistic way for a lot of card games to be played than just these best of one quick grinds that don't really get you anywhere, because you cannot really adjust and prepare for problems that your deck might face. You don't have a sideboard, you don't have best of 3 or 5 to make up for variance or bad luck and adjust your deck in game 2 or 3 onwards for that unfavorable matchup that you run into. If your matchup is bad, it's just going to be bad and you're just going to get like face rolled most of the time in this best of one and lose, and it's not very deep or very appealing really. While yeah, with this system we get to play something that is actually meaningful and where we feel like we can also use them to properly prepare for major tournaments. Because if the format of the tournament, of the major tournaments, is the same in the end as what you're playing on a daily basis, you're preparing for the thing that matters, rather than just playing a format that is semi-pointless for the stuff that actually matters. Like in Hearthstone, ladder doesn't really help you prepare that well for major tournaments. There's some help, but tournament decklists are still a bit different than ladder decklists, and also in tournaments you have this whole different formats with multiple decks and stuff. So there's no room inside the game itself to prepare for it. He further said, "We're experimenting with a lot of things right now. We'll probably have a better idea later." Carlucci said, "One of the things about ladders that we noticed is that they tend to optimize for, rather than the most fun deck or the best deck, the deck that can win 51% of the time as fast as possible." I think that's a bit of an overstatement in the sense that if you can get more than 51% while still having a fast deck, you obviously optimize for that still. But the weird correlation or like relationship between win percentage and speed per game makes the ideal ladder decks not the actual like strongest decks in terms of pure win percentage, and makes it just like, yeah, playing ladder is more like kind of optimizing production, a production line in a in the industry or something, and it's not trying to like create the best product as a whole. It's just about optimizing like time efficiency versus performance and stuff. And that's also a thing that doesn't help you for tournaments, because in tournaments it matters not how fast you win, as long as you win within the time constraints of the tournament, but only how high your win percentage is across the board and stuff like that. And we can see that in games, how some of the ladders sometimes are just infested by fast aggressive decks because they are good enough to have a positive win record, and they're the most time efficient ones. And it just kind of distorts the whole thing. And I think it's really nice to move away from that and just focus on the things that really matter. He further said it not only affects the experience of other users who feel like they're playing against the deck over and over, which is another aspect of it, it also makes people play with decks they might not want to play with just because it's the most optimal thing. To be fair, I think that's kind of like a bit of an empty phrase, because either format really does that. Like, if the highest win percent, if the deck with the highest pure win percentage is a deck you don't really like or enjoy, you might still just play it in the tournament because it's the one that gives you the best shot at winning. So that doesn't really change here, but it still gives you a bit more flexibility and options in deck choice, balance things out a bit more, makes time less of a concern, and lets you focus more on actually optimizing the chances of your deck winning, which is really nice. So yeah, I think it's cool that they focus on competitive play even at the base level of the game, and and basically make this like tournament competitive support the natural way the game is played, and then build on it with like major competitive scene on top for people to aspire to, rather than have this distortion of the daily ladder grinder and these big major tournaments that are completely different and only matter so much even for what's played on a daily basis. Like in Hearthstone, the tournament results have only so much relevance for daily ladder play because the formats are fairly different. While here we would end up with something like in Magic, where if a Pro Tour like major tournament changes the metagame, breaks certain decks or whatever, this is gonna be relevant down to the lowest level because everybody plays the same kind of game in a way. And that also makes, in my opinion, the tournament circuit at the top a lot more interesting and appealing to watch for players of all skill levels alike, because they can take something away from it. While in Hearthstone, you just play ladder casually for fun. What happens at tournaments is not very relevant or helpful to you or interesting to you, in my opinion, really. And yeah, they also take another page basically out of the paper card game world and from Magic, where they want to give you the freedom of like format diversity that you have in Magic. Like there's a million casual formats of all kinds in Magic, and if you look at other digital card games, they all have very strict built-in rules with no customization options. Cannot even like do whatever you want in friendly games. Like look at Eternal. You can't even like break the 75 card, 25 power rule in friendly games. You can't sideboard in friendly games, and so on. There's like so little flexibility, and they want to offer alternative game modes. Bonnet said, we want to do limited. That's the obvious thing, so there's going to be limited formats, probably sealed and draft, stuff like that. Going to be interesting how draft is going to work in a game like this, but we'll learn eventually. And then he further said, we are still working on the design of it, so it's hard to promise something very specific. We've been testing those internally and they are really, really fun. So they're still working out how limited is ideally working. And next he said, that's one of the things Richard Garfield and Scaff Elias are really excited about, because of course they have this sea of experience from working on Magic the Gathering, Carlucci said. But keep in mind, this is a digital card game, so we can do a lot of things we couldn't do within the limitations of a physical card game. So there might be like some cool digital spins on regular draft and sealed, stuff like that. Next, he said cards will rotate. This is a very important statement and one that I'm very happy about, because I think not rotating is going to make games stale. It's going to make decks look at the same a lot. It's going to make it hard to shift power level of colors from set to set. It's going to cause power creep concerns. I mean, look at Hearthstone. The non-rotating classic set is a big issue, and I've been calling this basically already back when they announced it. I was streaming some Hearthstone at the time and discussed it on stream, and I thought it was a disastrous decision, and Brian Kibler basically has been saying the same ever since and still keeps missionizing against the classic set and for something like a core set to bring back some classic cards and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm really happy that they already say this early that there will be rotation, and also eventually different formats like classic formats bringing back and various other like similar formats. Like for example here they said that's a good thing in general because it avoids things like power creep. Bonnet said power creep is blah blah blah. That's not that's just them explaining power creep. And then he further said it also makes it more accessible for people that want to jump in a couple years down the line. They don't have a backlog of cards, so that's another thing. It makes the game more new player friendly if for TCG, because a TCG without rotation is gonna get really expensive down the line. So rotation is important for that. And then we will see classic formats and formats with like specific ranges of sets legal, just like we know from Magic, and maybe even other stuff. But yeah, he said this is years down the line, but maybe doing classic formats or formats with certain blocks, maybe those are randomly chosen. Maybe we pick specific things that we think are interesting, Carlucci added. That's also like an interesting bit here. Formats with certain blocks. That's a pretty interesting thing, because lately what we know from card games in the digital space is we usually get a set, a campaign, adventure type thing, a set, and so on. And here he said blocks. Anyone that plays Magic or played Magic knows what that means. In Magic, a block is a number of now 2, used to be often 3 sets that are connected to each other, often one major set that is released first, and then 1 or 2 smaller consecutive sets. By now it's 2 sets, and I think they're both the same size, that are connected story-wise and explore certain themes together and are like thematically and also mechanically linked, like in terms of in-game mechanics, and build certain units. And there's usually 1 block released a year. Right now I think it's 2 in Magic because they cut them down to 2 sets, and there's no core set at the moment, which they will reintroduce soon. So there's usually like 4 sets a year, which amounts to 1 to 2 blocks, or like a big block and a core set or something like that. So this is interesting that he used that particular phrasing, because that makes me think they're gonna be going more for a Magic-like set and release structure than what we currently know from digital card games with these adventure types. Also makes sense because they don't really want to support much single player mode, so they might just stay away from the typical adventure campaign mode for partially that reason. But yeah, that is something interesting to pick up on here. I think that we'll potentially see 2 or 3 that's thematically and mechanically linked to each other in blocks. The next thing he said is like one of the most important things, and we learned this from our other games as well, is that we let the community figure those things out. Rather than deciding this is how you're gonna play, we'd rather give the community the tools for them to be able to make those formats. So that's what I mentioned earlier with the diverse range of casual formats in Magic. You will basically get kind of like a sandbox in Artifact where you can basically set the rules for the format you want to play and enforce them. So you can even like run tournaments within the client that enforce those rules, like he makes the example here. So tomorrow you want to run a tournament and you say, I only want cards that start with the letter C. The game will give you the opportunity to set up a tournament queue with enforced rules that only lets you join with decks that only contain cards that start with the letter C, and then you can play that tournament. And that's amazing, because that gives you all the flexibility that all these other digital card games missing, and that all the paper card games have. Because I feel like currently most of the games that we know are either strictly digital games or strictly paper games, and not drawing a lot of like experience, wisdom, and inspiration from each other. While it feels with Artifact, they are basically taking all the good parts of both worlds and try to put them together into like the best possible new card game in the best possible and most convenient medium, which is digital, by combining all of these things, taking the flexibility and the diversity of paper games and the secondary market and investment aspects and stuff of a TCG from paper and combining it with a lot of digital flexibility and digital design space and stuff like that. So I think this is really great. It also gives a lot of appeal to casuals, where they can play all these fun, weird, wonky casual formats, and also gives people the opportunity to try and invent new formats like we have in Magic. I mean, some formats in Magic wouldn't exist without the community having like invented something similar first, pushed it enough so that even like stores ran like unofficial tournaments in those and stuff, until like Wizards of the Coast eventually picked them up, changed and tuned them a bit, and then put them out as a major supported format. And I think that's what they're going for here. They're just gonna see what creative formats the community comes up with and might adopt the best and most balanced ideas into the range of major supported formats that they will support for like big tournaments and official supported stuff. And all the other stuff can still be played by like community support, since you can even run like community run tournaments with wonky rules within the client. So yeah, I think this is pretty amazing and something that the digital card game world is sorely missing right now. Letting people do more stuff, letting people do the things they want to do, because you're so constrained in all the digital card games that I know you can only basically play exactly the way they want you to play, and that's it. And even in friendly games where it should be irrelevant how you play, and you should be able to just do whatever you want and set the rules with the person you're playing, but you can't. So Artifact won't make that mistake and give you all the freedom it can, apparently, which is amazing. The next thing they talk about is sort of the 3-lane kind of system, and giving some hints on the future of tournament structures. Will there be best of threes, stuff like that? Will there be sideboards and so on? How tournament structures will likely look like, at least in my opinion. So I'll read the quote by Barnett and let you know what this means in my opinion. When you match with someone in the real world, it's like, I win, want to play another game, and then we do. Barnett said, it gives you a sense of who's better overall, not just who's better because of what happened to happen in that one game. Because we all know card games have a lot of variance, and if you only get to play one game, it doesn't tell you a whole lot who is the better player or who has the better deck, because variance. So, and rematching on ladder is nearly impossible because it's random matchmaking and you get another opponent next time. So one of those options to do that is best of 3. But as has been stated by Rock Paper Shotgun in the paragraph before is Artifact's 3-lane board helps recreate the tiebreakers and rematches that you get in physical card games. And it's expanded on here. It gives you online, it's really hard to get a rematch. You just say, I played you and lost, so I'll play somebody else now. Having the 3 lanes is almost like a best 2 out of 3 battle. Get a sense of winning or losing on different lanes within the space of a single game without having to worry about rematching. So this alone already gives you an idea that why the 3 lanes are there. They are meant to reduce variance in card games, because we all know you can win in 2 lanes or even in 1 lane hard. So it's even like kind of a lower variance best of 3, because in the best of 3 you have to win 2 out of 3. In 1 game of Artifact, you can win 2 out of 3, or you can win 1 out of 3 really hard. So if you, like in Magic, you often have these games where there's a 1 game where you crush your opponent, and the other 2 games you just like barely lose, and then because of variance, and you're still like favored in the matchup, but the 2 other games like barely slipped away from you, which is really frustrating. While in Artifact, if you win really hard in that 1 lane because your matchup is good, and if your matchup is favorable, you should be able to play out that advantage in at least 1 lane. Then in that 1 lane, you can win hard enough to make up for the other lanes barely losing and still win the whole match. And the whole best 2 out of 3 analogy that I make here makes me believe that this is actually what the tournament structure will be like. The game will be played in a best of 1 in terms of games, like 1 game of Artifact, but the game itself playing like a best of 3. And the next part is really nice. Down here later, they basically talk about the item deck as being like sort of your sideboard. As people might know from Magic, those are cards that you can bring in game 2 or 3 onwards to adjust your deck and make your deck better suited for your opponent's deck. So the picture that I get here is that they basically try to make sure to implement all these like best of 3 dynamics that you have in a game like Magic into exactly this 1 game of Artifact, while giving you the feel of playing a full match and not these like stupid high variance best of 1 games that we know from Ladder and most other games, which can be very like exhausting and frustrating for people. So I think this is a really cool idea. So you basically start your game with your sideboard immediately, so you're gonna have access to your sideboard from game 1, in the sense that your item deck is your sideboard, so you will put items in your item deck to compensate for weaknesses of your deck. And you will also basically play a best of 3 all at once, which gives you all the upsides of a best of 3 while eliminating the downside of taking a lot of time. Like, for example, anyone here that plays Eternal knows that in the closed beta they experimented with best of 3 ladder for a short period of time, and it led to 20 to 30 minute matchmaking queues, and just overall didn't work out really well because the best of 3 matches take way too long, and it's very hostile to people just want to hop in, play a couple quick games and hop out again. So it doesn't really work. But Artifact found a way to give you this whole satisfying, decisive win best of 3 experience, reducing the variance, while still keeping the games at, as they said, an average of 12 minutes. The turn timer is about 45 seconds, and games usually last around 12 minutes according to Valve's internal testing. So you basically get to play a whole best of 3 in 12 minutes, because you basically play all the 3 games simultaneously, and you get the lower variance because you can also win 1 game or 1 lane very hard while still losing the other 2. So I think this is an amazing system. The one concern that I might have is that it makes tournament games, matches may be a bit short, like especially at a higher level. If you get to see like 10 to 15 minutes matches between top pros, just a little short, because I mean, would be nice to see the top players match up against each other for a little longer. So that's like the main downside of playing out a whole match in one game over like 10 to 15 minutes, because you play 3 games at once basically. But that's about it. Other than that, I think that's kind of like a genius idea to solve a lot of the issues that exist in digital card games right now and balance the convenience of being time efficient with the satisfaction and variance reduction of the best of 3 and sideboard experience that usually clashes a lot with the time efficiency aspect. So I think this is a big deal and really amazing, and solves a lot of the questions that people were wondering whether or not there will be like best of 3s and sideboards and stuff like that, because I think all the way Barnett phrased this answers that. The 3 lanes basically are your 3 games, so there will not be any need for an actual best of 3, and the item deck will make the need for an actual sideboard obsolete, and it's already factored into the game design itself. So this is really great. And yeah, the 3 lanes also make games a lot less repetitive, and all in all, now the 3 lanes I think make a lot more sense to people that before have been saying like, oh, it just adds unnecessary like complexity to the game, making it feel or look more sophisticated or complex than it is, and not really adding anything, because I think this explains very well what it adds, and I think what it adds is amazing, and it's a really smart idea, and I'm looking forward to see how this actually plays out and works out in the end, because I like the sound of it, and I'm really pumped for seeing how this actually works out, and really looking forward to get away from these like monotonous high variance best of 1 ladder grinds, getting into like a lower variance diverse tournament style of competitive play from the base, feeling like every game I play matters in the sense of testing my deck, tuning my deck, or preparing for like upcoming tournaments and stuff. That is really amazing. And also being able to make sure that more often than not, a game, or rather a match, if you want to call one game in Artifact a match because of the 3 lanes, more often than not be won by the best deck and or the player that played the best, rather than the underdog, like the unfavored worst player winning because of like bad luck variance. So I think that's pretty cool. And there's still like plenty of variance and ways for the underdog to come out ahead in the game, for sure, but it's just more mild, I would assume, from like what we heard here. And yeah, I think that's a great direction, and further cements the assumption that Artifact is gonna be focusing more and optimizing more for competitive play and for being a major esport, rather than the most broad casual appeal like Hearthstone that then kind of just like has to come up with or shoehorn in an esport take on it because the game is big enough and people compete in it, so they wanna like they need to have esport support for it, even though it was not necessarily designed as an esport or meant for an esport, and is not best suited for an esport, while Valve seem to very much design Artifact as an esport, with esports in mind, and meant to be competed in tournaments, even at the lowest level. And that is exactly my kind of game. That's the kind of card game I want to play, and I can't wait. I hope you guys are as pumped as I am. Every new information that I get makes me even more excited and optimistic about the game. And yeah, this is great stuff. Gives us a bunch of cool new ideas on how playing the game on a daily basis will work out. This once again was a pretty long video, but there was a whole bunch of cool information to be extracted here, I think, just by the ways the quotes were phrased, and I like that it was quotes because it was very important to get the exact phrasing, because phrasings like the block and the best of 3 analogy and stuff like that, and the sideboard similarity, the sideboard comparison for the item deck and stuff like that are pretty big tells if you experience with card games and have a good imagination and idea of what they could go for. So there's a lot to be extracted just by how they said the things they shared. So that's a pretty big deal. And yeah, let me know in the comments what you guys think, what your take is on especially all the quoted stuff in the article and the phrasing, if there's anything you agree with, you disagree with, or if there's anything else that you've found or felt there's hints at that I didn't cover here or that I missed. Yeah, let's just see, let's just extract the most possible from this latest piece of information while we wait to hear more about the deck. Anyway, that's it for this artifact update video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Wasn't too long. And of course, I'll see you next time once we have more information. And until then, don't forget to hit the like button down here. Subscribe to the channel to not miss out on any future videos, be it artifact updates or otherwise. And I thank you for watching. I'm Manu S, and I'm out. See you next time.